The rock struck Alara's shoulder before she saw who threw it. She stumbled forward, her bare feet sliding on the frozen mud, the wooden bucket in her hands tipping dangerously. Icy water sloshed over the rim, soaking through her thin dress and stealing what little warmth her body had left. Pain bloomed across her collarbone, sharp and hot, but she didn't cry out. She never did anymore. "That's for stealing from old man Joseph's garden, you filthy rat!" a boy's voice shouted from behind her. Alara didn't turn around. She knew who it was. Marcus, the blacksmith's son, always led the hunting parties against her. She gripped the bucket tighter and kept walking, her breath forming small clouds in the bitter winter air. Her shoulder throbbed with each step, but the village well was still 3 houses away, and she needed this water to last through the night. "I didn't steal anything," she said quietly, more to herself than to him. But her voice was so small, so worn down by years of accusations and stones and closed doors, that it barely carried on the wind. "Liar!" Another rock, this one missing her head by inches. "Everyone knows you take whatever you can find. You're worse than the wolves in the forest." The wolves. Everyone always compared her to the wolves, as if being poor and orphaned made her as dangerous as the beasts that howled beyond the village boundary every night, as if kindness to starving animals was the same as betraying humanity itself. Alara reached her shack as the sun began its descent toward the tree line. The structure barely deserved to be called a home. 4 walls of rotting wood, a roof that leaked when it rained, and a door that hung crooked on rusted hinges. It sat at the very edge of the village, where the dirt path ended and the wild forest began. No one else wanted to live this close to the boundary. No one else was desperate enough. She pushed the door open with her hip and set the bucket down inside. Her entire body ached, not just from today's stone, but from all of them, from the countless times she'd been pushed, shoved, tripped, and beaten simply for existing in a world that had decided she didn't deserve space in it. The shack was dark and cold. She had no candles left, no oil for a lamp. The small fireplace in the corner held only ash from 2 nights ago, when she'd burned the last of her kindling. Her stomach growled, a hollow sound that echoed in the emptiness. Alara walked to the corner where she kept her food stores. A wooden crate, half broken, with a cloth draped over it. She lifted the cloth and stared at what remained of her provisions. 3 small potatoes, withered and soft, a handful of dried beans, and 2 pieces of stale bread she'd found behind the baker's shop 3 days ago. This was supposed to last her through the week. She picked up 1 piece of bread and held it in her trembling hands. Her stomach twisted with hunger, begging her to eat it, to give her body something, anything to survive on. But her eyes drifted to the small pile of scraps she'd set aside near the door. Vegetable peelings she'd collected from the trash heaps. A bit of spoiled meat the butcher had thrown out. Crusts and bones and things no human would eat. She saved them every night. For the strays. For the creatures that wandered close to her shack, drawn by the scent of food and the absence of human cruelty. "You're an idiot, Alara," she whispered to herself. "You're starving and you're feeding animals." But even as she said it, she was wrapping the scraps in an old cloth and tucking the bundle into her pocket. Because the truth was, the animals were the only living things that didn't throw stones at her. They didn't call her names. They didn't blame her for crimes she didn't commit. They just looked at her with hungry eyes and accepted whatever kindness she could offer. And maybe that made her an idiot. Maybe it made her weak. But it also made her feel like she was still human, still capable of something good in a world that had taken everything else from her. Alara ate half of the stale bread, chewing slowly to make it last, and saved the other half for the morning. Then she wrapped herself in the only blanket she owned, a threadbare thing full of holes, and lay down on the dirt floor. The cold seeped into her bones immediately, but she was used to it. She'd learned to sleep through cold, through hunger, through the howling of wolves that sometimes sounded so close she swore they were scratching at her door. Tonight the howling seemed louder than usual. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but her mind wouldn't quiet. It kept replaying the day, the stone hitting her shoulder, Marcus's voice calling her a thief, the way the village women had pulled their children away when she'd walked past, as if poverty were contagious. "I'm not a bad person," she whispered into the darkness. I'm not. But no one was there to hear her. No one was there to tell her she was wrong about herself. Outside, beyond the crooked door and the rotting walls, the forest breathed. Trees swayed in the wind, shadows moved between the trunks, and somewhere deep in the darkness, something watched. Something that had been watching for longer than Ilara knew. The wolves were closer tonight, she could feel it. She could. Ilara woke to the sound of whimpering. At first, she thought it was her own voice, some nightmare she'd been having about being chased through the village while stones rained down on her back. But then the sound came again, thin and pained, and she realized it was coming from outside. She sat up slowly, her body stiff from sleeping on the frozen ground. The shack was completely dark now. No moonlight filtered through the gaps in the walls, the kind of darkness that felt heavy, like it was pressing down on her chest. The whimpering continued, soft, desperate. Ilara pushed herself to her feet and wrapped the blanket around her shoulders. Every instinct told her to stay inside, to ignore whatever was out there. The village elders had warned everyone since childhood, never go near the forest at night, never answer strange sounds, never trust the darkness beyond the boundary. But the sound was so small, so broken. She picked up the cloth bundle of scraps from where she'd left it by the door and pushed the crooked door open. The cold hit her like a physical force. The temperature had dropped even further since sunset, and her breath came out in thick white clouds. Snow had begun to fall, light flakes that drifted down from an invisible sky and settled on the ground like ash. "Hello?" Ilara called softly. "Is someone there?" The whimpering stopped. She took a step forward, her bare feet sinking into the thin layer of snow. The forest loomed ahead of her, a wall of black trees and deeper shadows. Nothing moved, nothing made a sound. Maybe she'd imagined it. Maybe hunger and cold had finally started to affect her mind. She was about to turn back inside when she saw it. A small shape, half buried in the snow about 20 feet from her door. Dark against white. Unmoving now, but she could see the shallow rise and fall of breathing. Ilara's heart began to race. She should go back inside. She should bar the door and pretend she'd seen nothing. But her feet were already moving, carrying her forward through the snow, the cold biting at her ankles and calves. As she got closer, the shape became clearer. It was an animal, small, curled into itself. A wolf pup. Ilara froze. Her breath caught in her throat. Wolves were dead. Everyone knew that. They killed livestock, dragged children from their beds, hunted in packs, and showed no mercy. The village had lost 3 people to wolf attacks in the last year alone, but this wasn't a grown wolf. This was a pup, maybe 3 or 4 months old, and it was dying. She knelt down beside it, her hands shaking. The pup's fur was silver white, almost glowing in the darkness. Beautiful, but it was matted with blood. Deep gashes ran along its side, dark and still seeping. Bite marks. The wounds looked wrong, too deliberate, like something had tried to tear the pup apart. "Oh no," Ilara whispered. "What happened to you?" The pup's eyes fluttered open. They were golden, bright and intelligent and filled with pain. They locked onto Ilara's face, and for a moment, she felt like she was being seen in a way she'd never been seen before. Not with judgment, not with disgust, just with pure, desperate hope. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly. "Your pack. Where's your pack?" The pup tried to lift its head, but the effort was too much. It collapsed back into the snow with a small, broken sound. Ilara knew what she should do. Leave it. Go back inside. Let nature take its course. This was a wolf, after all, the same species that had terrorized her village for generations. Saving it was not just stupid, it was dangerous. If anyone found out, they'd kill her. But all she could see were those golden eyes. All she could hear was that small, wounded sound. "You're just a baby," she whispered. "You didn't ask for this." She unwrapped the cloth bundle and pulled out the piece of spoiled meat. It wasn't much, barely enough to feed a cat, but it was something. She held it close to the pup's nose. "Here, she said gently. You need to eat. The pup didn't move at first. Then slowly, its nose twitched. Its mouth opened slightly, and Ilara placed the meat between its jaws. The pup's teeth closed around it weakly, and it began to chew with painful slowness. That's it, Ilara encouraged. Good. You're doing so good. She knew she was being foolish. She knew this pup could turn on her the moment it had strength. But watching it eat, watching life come back into those golden eyes, something inside her chest loosened. Something that had been tight and knotted for years. When the meat was gone, the pup looked at her again. This time, its gaze was different. Softer, almost grateful. I can't leave you out here, Ilara said, though she was talking more to herself than to the animal. You'll freeze to death, or whatever hurts you will come back. She looked down at her blanket. It was the only thing keeping her warm. Without it, she'd spend the night shivering, probably catch a fever, maybe die if the cold got bad enough. But the pup was dying right now. Not maybe. Right now. Ilara made her decision. She wrapped the blanket around the pup's small body, carefully avoiding the wounds, and lifted it into her arms. It was heavier than she expected, solid with muscle despite its size. The pup made a small sound, not quite a whimper, almost like a sigh. I've got you, Ilara whispered. I've got you. She carried the pup back to her shack and laid it down in the corner farthest from the door, where the drafts weren't as strong. She used the last of her water to clean the wounds as best she could, tearing strips from her already tattered dress to create makeshift bandages. The pup watched her the entire time, never growled, never snapped, just watched with those impossibly intelligent golden eyes. You're not like the others, are you? Ilara asked softly as she tied off the last bandage. You're different. The pup's tail moved slightly, just once, almost like an agreement. Ilara sat back against the wall, shivering now without her blanket. Her body was already aching from the cold, her teeth starting to chatter. She pulled her knees to her chest and wrapped her arms around herself, trying to preserve what little warmth she had left. I'm going to call you Ash, she said, looking at the pup's silver fur. Because you look like moonlight on ash. Is that okay? The pup's eyes closed slowly, then opened again. Ilara chose to believe that meant yes. She watched Ash breathe for a long time, counting each rise and fall of his small chest, making sure he was still alive, making sure she hadn't condemned them both to death for a moment of foolish kindness. Outside, the snow continued to fall, the forest continued to breathe, and somewhere in the darkness, something howled. It was a sound like nothing Ilara had ever heard before. Deep, ancient, filled with rage and grief. Ash's eyes snapped open, his whole body went rigid. And for just a second, Ilara could have sworn his eyes flashed red. 3 days passed, and Ash refused to die. Ilara had expected him to be gone by morning that first night. She'd seen enough death in her life to know what dying looked like, and Ash had been close. So close. But when dawn came, and pale light filtered through the cracks in her walls, the pup was still breathing, still watching her with those strange golden eyes. By the second day, the wounds had stopped bleeding entirely. By the third day, they were beginning to close. That's not possible, Ilara whispered, unwrapping the makeshift bandages to check the gashes along Ash's side. Where there should have been angry red inflammation and infection, there was only pink new skin. The deepest wound, the one that had cut almost to bone, was now just a thin line. Ash tilted his head and made a small sound, almost like he was asking what the problem was. Animals don't heal this fast, Ilara said, though she was talking to herself more than to him. Nothing heals this fast, not without medicine, not without... She trailed off, her hands hovering over the pup's fur. His silver coat had grown shinier over the past few days, fuller, like he was thriving despite having eaten only scraps. And he was bigger, too. Not much, but enough that she noticed, as if 3 days had been 3 weeks. What are you? She asked quietly. Ash simply stared at her, unblinking, and Alara felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. She'd been giving him most of her food, the other half of the stale bread, one of the withered potatoes, mashed up so he could eat it easier. The beans soaked in water until they were soft enough for his young teeth. She told herself she wasn't hungry, that she'd eaten enough, but her stomach growled constantly now. Her hands shook when she tried to do simple tasks. But every time she looked at Ash, every time she saw him growing stronger while she grew weaker, something warm bloomed in her chest. Something she hadn't felt in so long she'd almost forgotten its name. Purpose. She mattered to this creature. Her existence, her choices, her kindness, they mattered. For the first time in years, Alara wasn't just surviving. She was keeping something else alive. On the morning of the fourth day, she woke to find Ash sitting up, fully alert, staring at the door. His ears were pricked forward, his body tense. A low rumble vibrated in his chest, not quite a growl, but close. "What is it?" Alara asked, pushing herself up on her elbows. Her body ached. She'd barely slept. Too cold without her blanket, too weak from lack of food. Ash didn't look at her. His attention was fixed completely on the door. Then Alara heard it. Voices outside. Multiple voices. Angry. "I'm telling you, she's been stealing from my chicken coop." That was old man Joseph, his voice sharp with accusation. "And I saw her near the edge of the forest yesterday at dusk," another voice added. Marcus's father, the blacksmith. "Everyone knows what that means. She's in league with the wolves." "We should drive her out," a woman's voice said. Alara recognized it as belonging to Margaret, who ran the village store. "She's brought nothing but bad luck since she was born. Her parents died of plague, and now the wolves are coming closer every night," Joseph finished. "It's her. It's always been her. She's cursed." Alara's blood ran cold. She knew this moment would come eventually. She'd always known. But hearing it now, hearing them gather outside her door like a mob, made terror spike through her chest. Ash's rumble grew louder, his lips pulled back slightly, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp, too developed for a pup his age. "No," Alara whispered, crawling forward and placing a hand on Ash's back. "You can't make noise. They can't know you're here. They'll kill you. They'll kill both of us." Ash looked at her then, and something in his expression made her breath catch. It wasn't fear in those golden eyes. It was fury. Pure, protective fury. The voices outside grew louder. "Maybe we should just burn the shack down," someone suggested. "Make sure the problem's dealt with permanently." "With her inside?" Margaret's voice, uncertain now. "She's not really one of us anyway," Marcus's father said. "Never has been." Alara's hand tightened on Ash's fur. She was shaking now, not from cold, but from fear so intense it made her nauseous. They were really going to do it. After years of abuse, years of barely surviving, they were finally going to finish what they'd started. Ash moved before she could stop him. He pulled away from her hand and padded to the door, his movements silent despite his size. Then he did something that made Alara's heart nearly stop. He growled. Not a puppy growl, not a small, harmless sound. This was deep, resonant, ancient. It vibrated through the air like thunder, filling the tiny shack with power that seemed impossible for something so small. The voices outside went silent. "What was that?" someone whispered. It came from inside the shack. "She does have a wolf. I told you. She's harboring one of those monsters." The fear in their voices was palpable now. Alara could hear them backing away, their footsteps crunching in the snow. "We need to get the hunters," Joseph said, his voice shaking. "Now, before it gets out." The footsteps retreated, becoming fainter until there was only silence. Alara stared at Ash, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. The pup turned to look at her, and for just a moment, his eyes flashed with something that wasn't quite natural. Something that glowed in the darkness of the shack. "They're going to come back," Ilara whispered. "With weapons. With fire. They're going to kill us both." Ash walked back to her and pressed his head against her hand. The gesture was gentle, reassuring, like he was telling her not to worry. But how could she not worry? She'd just signed both of their death warrants. "I should have left you in the snow," she said, but there was no conviction in her voice. Even now, even facing death, she couldn't bring herself to regret saving him. Ash made a soft sound, almost like disagreement. Ilara gathered him into her arms, holding him close, feeling his warmth against her starving, freezing body. "I don't understand what you are," she whispered into his fur, "but I'm glad I found you. Even if this is how it ends. I'm glad I wasn't alone." She felt Ash's heart beating against her chest, strong and steady, alive because of her. Alive because she'd chosen kindness over survival. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was all she'd ever needed to prove. That in a world full of cruelty, she'd remained soft. That in a life that had taken everything from her, she'd still found something to give. Outside, the sun continued its path across the winter sky. The snow continued to fall, and in the village, men gathered weapons. They will come tonight. Ilara knew that with certainty. What she didn't know was that tonight, everything would change. The full moon rose over the forest like a silver eye. Ilara watched it through the gaps in her walls, her arms still wrapped around Ash, waiting for the inevitable. The hunters would come. They would break down her door. They would kill Ash first, probably, then decide what to do with her. Maybe they'd show mercy. Maybe they'd just drive her into the forest and let the cold finish what they'd started. Either way, this was the end. But as the moonlight grew stronger, painting everything in shades of silver and shadow, Ash began to change. It started with his breathing. It became faster, more labored, like he was struggling against something. Then, his body temperature spiked. Ilara could feel it through his fur, heat radiating off him in waves that made her pull back in alarm. "Ash! What's wrong?" The pup pulled away from her completely and moved to the center of the shack. His whole body was trembling now, muscles tensing and relaxing in rhythmic waves. His eyes, those golden eyes that had watched her with such intelligence, began to glow. Not just reflect the moonlight, actually glow, like there was fire behind them. "Ash!" Ilara scrambled forward, reaching for him, but he backed away. For the first time since she'd found him, he looked at her with something like a warning. "Stay back." She froze, her hand extended, fear and confusion warring in her chest. The wounds on Ash's side, the ones that had been healing impossibly fast, suddenly split open. Not bleeding, but glowing with the same golden light as his eyes. The light spread through his veins, visible beneath his fur, creating patterns across his body like ancient runes. "What's happening to you?" Ilara whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Please, I don't understand." Ash's head tilted back, and he released a sound that was part howl, part something else entirely. Something that made the air itself vibrate. The sound pierced through the walls of the shack and echoed into the forest beyond. And the forest answered. From every direction, wolves began to howl, not the distant sounds Ilara was used to hearing. These were close, so close she could feel them in her bones. Dozens of voices rising in unison, creating a symphony of wild, primal power. Ash's glowing intensified until Ilara had to shield her eyes. The light filled the entire shack, bright as daylight, burning away shadows. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. Ilara lowered her hand and blinked away the spots in her vision. Ash was still there, still a pup, but something fundamental had changed. He looked more solid now, more real, like he'd been slightly translucent before and had only now become fully present in the world. The wounds were completely gone. No scars, no marks, just perfect silver fur that seemed to shimmer with its own internal light. And his eyes. Those golden eyes were fixed on the door, calm and knowing. "Ash?" Ilara's voice was barely a whisper. The pup turned to look at her one last time. Then he did something that shattered Ilara's heart into pieces. He walked to the door, nosed it open, and stepped outside into the moonlight. "No!" Ilara lunged forward, grabbing for him, but he was already gone. "Ash! Wait! Don't leave! Please!" She stumbled out into the snow, barefoot and desperate, searching the darkness for any sign of him. But Ash had vanished into the forest like he'd never existed at all. "Please come back," Ilara sobbed, falling to her knees in the snow. "I don't care what you are. I don't care if you're dangerous. Just come back. Don't leave me alone. Please don't leave me alone." But the forest was silent now. The howling had stopped. Even the wind seemed to be holding its breath. Ilara knelt there in the snow until her body went numb, until she couldn't feel her fingers or toes, until hypothermia began to cloud her thoughts. She didn't care. Let the cold take her. Let death be gentle where life has been cruel. She'd saved something beautiful, and it had left her anyway. Just like everything else, the moon continued its arc across the sky. Hours passed. Ilara's consciousness began to fade, darkness creeping in at the edges of her vision. She thought about her parents, dead from plague when she was 5. She thought about the village that had never wanted her. She thought about golden eyes and silver fur and the brief, shining moment when she'd felt like her existence had meaning. She was ready to let go. Then she felt it. A vibration in the ground beneath her knees, rhythmic, growing stronger. Footsteps, many footsteps, coming closer. Ilara forced her head up, forced her eyes to focus. Through the haze of approaching death, she saw shapes emerging from the forest. Large shapes, moving with predatory grace, wolves, dozens of them, surrounding her shack, surrounding her, their eyes reflecting the moonlight like scattered coins. This was it then. This was how she died. Torn apart by the very creatures she'd tried to help. At least it would be quick. But the wolves didn't attack. They sat down in the snow, forming a perfect circle around her, and waited. Waited for what? The ground trembled again, harder this time. The trees at the edge of the forest swayed though there was no wind. And then, from the deepest shadows, something emerged. Not a wolf. Not exactly. A man. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with inhuman grace. He was dressed in black, clothes that seemed to be made of shadow itself, and his hair was dark as midnight. But his eyes were the same impossible gold as ashes. Behind him walked a massive silver wolf, easily twice the size of the others. Its fur seemed to glow in the moonlight, and when it looked at Ilara, she saw recognition in its gaze. Ash, not a pup, his true form, his true. The man stopped a few feet from where Ilara knelt in the snow. He towered over her, radiating power that made her earlier fear of the village mob seem laughable. This was a real danger. This was death in a form that could think and plan and destroy with purpose. But when he spoke, his voice was surprisingly gentle. "You fed my son," he said. "When he was wounded and dying, cast out by traitors who sought his life, you gave him your food, your warmth, your protection." Ilara's mind struggled to process his words. Son. This man's son, which meant, "You're the Alpha King," she whispered. The man's lips curved into something that might have been a smile. "I am Kale, and you, little human, have done what none of my pack could do. You saved the heir to the silver throne." Behind him, Ash, the massive silver wolf, stepped forward and lowered his head, pressing his nose gently against Ilara's frozen hand. She was hallucinating. She had to be. Hypothermia caused visions, didn't it? Beautiful, impossible visions before death. "Why?" Kyle asked, crouching down so his golden eyes were level with hers. "Why did you save him? You must have known what he was. Must have suspected." "He was hurt," Ilara said simply. Her voice was weak, slurred from the cold. "He was alone. I couldn't just leave him to die. Even though your people hunt us, even though we're monsters to you." "He wasn't a monster." Tears froze on Ilara's cheeks. He was just scared, and small, and no one deserves to die alone and scared. Kyle stared at her for a long moment. Then he reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder, right where the stone had struck her days ago. His palm was warm, so impossibly warm. "You're dying," he observed. "I know. Do you want to die?" Ilara thought about it. I really thought about it. Did she want to die? A week ago, the answer might have been yes. But now, after feeling what it was like to matter, to be needed, to connect with something beyond herself, "No," she whispered. "I want to live." Kale's hand remained on Ilara's shoulder, warmth seeping through her frozen skin, anchoring her to consciousness. The wolves surrounding them hadn't moved. They sat like statues, their eyes fixed on their alpha king and the dying human girl at his feet. "My son tells me you gave him everything," Kale said softly. "Your food when you were starving, your blanket when you were freezing, your protection when your own people want you dead." "How?" Ilara's teeth chattered so hard she could barely form words. "How did he tell you?" "We don't communicate the way humans do." Kale's golden eyes held hers, and she felt like he was looking deeper than her face, deeper than her body, all the way down to whatever made her who she was. "We share memories, emotions. When I touched my son tonight, I saw everything. I saw you kneeling in the snow, choosing to save a creature you'd been taught to fear. I felt your kindness, your pain." He paused, his jaw tightening. "I felt how close you came to death, multiple times, all because you chose him over yourself." "He needed me more," Ilara said simply. Kale's eyes flashed with something intense. "That's not how the world works, little human. The strong survive, the weak perish. You were weak, starving, and you gave your strength to my son anyway. Why?" "Because someone had to." Ilara's voice was barely a whisper now. Her vision was starting to blur again, darkness creeping in at the edges. "Someone had to show him that not all humans are cruel, that some of us still remember how to be kind. Even if it kills you? Especially then." She smiled, though it hurt. "What good is surviving if you lose the parts of yourself that make you worth saving?" Kyle went very still. The pack around them seemed to hold their breath. Even the night itself seemed to pause, waiting. Then the Alpha King did something that made every wolf in the clearing tense with shock. He removed his heavy black cloak and wrapped it around Ilara's shoulders. The fabric was impossibly warm, like it held the heat of 1,000 fires, and it smelled of forest and moonlight and something wild she couldn't name. "You have a debt owed to you," Kyle said, standing and pulling Ilara to her feet with gentle strength. She swayed, barely able to stand, but his hands steadied her. "Name your price. Gold, land, a place in the village with protection from those who've wronged you. Anything you desire, and it's yours." Ilara looked up at him, then past him to where Ash sat in his true form. The massive silver wolf watched her with those same intelligent golden eyes, the same gentle expression he'd had as a pup. "Is he safe now?" she asked. "The ones who hurt him, are they gone?" Kale's expression darkened. "They've been dealt with. My son is safe." "Then I don't want anything," Ilara said. "I didn't save him for a reward. I saved him because it was right." A ripple of movement went through the pack. Wolves shifted, glanced at each other, their ears flicking with obvious confusion. Kyle's eyes narrowed. "You refuse payment?" "I refuse to turn kindness into a transaction." Ilara met his gaze despite the fear coursing through her, despite knowing she was surrounded by creatures that could tear her apart in seconds. "He's alive. That's enough for me." "You're dying, little human." Kyle's voice was soft but firm. "You gave everything to save him. You have nothing left. No food, no warmth. Your people want you dead. Without help, you won't survive the week." "Then I'll die knowing I did something good." Ilara's legs finally gave out and she collapsed forward. Kyle caught her easily, lifting her into his arms like she weighed nothing. She should have been afraid, should have fought. But she was so tired, so cold, and his warmth felt like the sun after an endless winter. "You're brave," Kyle murmured, looking down at her. "And foolish, and far too good for this cruel world." "Story of my life," Alara managed to joke, though it came out as barely a whisper. Kale's lips curved into an actual smile this time. It transformed his face, made him look less like a terrifying alpha and more like someone who understood, someone who'd seen too much cruelty too. "I'm going to do something," he said, "and you can refuse, but know that if you refuse, you die tonight, here, in the snow, alone." "What?" Alara asked, though keeping her eyes open was becoming harder with each second. "I'm going to take you into the forest, into our territory. We'll feed you, warm you, heal you. You'll be safe there, protected. No one will ever hurt you again." It sounded like paradise. It sounded like a dream. It sounded too good to be true. "Why would you do that?" Alara asked. "I'm just a human. I'm nothing to your pack." "You saved the future of our bloodline." Kyle's voice was fierce now, protective. "That makes you everything." Alara wanted to argue. I wanted to refuse. But the truth was, she didn't want to die. Not anymore. Not when there was a chance, however small, that life could be something other than suffering. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." Kyle nodded once, then turned to the pack. "We return home. The human comes with us." Immediately, growls erupted from several wolves, not threatening Alara directly, but clearly unhappy with this decision. A large brown wolf stood up, his hackles raised, and shifted before Alara's eyes, his body contorted, bones cracking and reshaping, until a tall man with brown hair and angry eyes stood in his place. "My king, you can't be serious," the man said, his voice rough. "A human? In our territory? In our home? I am deadly serious, Garrett." Kale's voice dropped to a dangerous tone that made every wolf flatten their ears. "This human saved my son. Or have you forgotten that Ash was dying? That the traitors nearly succeeded in ending our bloodline?" "We're grateful she helped," Garrett said, though his expression suggested otherwise. "But bringing her into the heart of our territory breaks every law we have. Humans are not—" "I am Alpha," Kale interrupted, his eyes flashing with power that made the air itself seem to vibrate. "I make the laws, and I say she comes with us." Garrett's jaw clenched, but he bowed his head in submission. "Yes, my king." Another wolf shifted, this one a woman with silver-streaked hair. "The council will challenge this decision." "Let them try," Kyle said coldly. "I'd enjoy reminding them who rules this pack." The woman's eyes flicked to Alara, still cradled in Kyle's arms. There was something in her gaze that wasn't quite hostility, but wasn't kindness either. Calculation. Like she was trying to figure out what Alara represented, what threat or opportunity she posed. "Come, Mira," Kyle said to her. "We've wasted enough time in human lands." He began walking toward the forest, his strides long and confident. Ash moved to walk beside him in his massive wolf form, occasionally glancing up at Alara with what she could only describe as concern. The pack followed, though several wolves continued to growl their displeasure. Alara pressed closer to Kyle's chest, fear spiking through her exhaustion. She was surrounded by predators, ancient, powerful predators who clearly didn't want her there. "They hate me," she whispered. "They fear change," Kyle corrected. "And you represent a change they never expected. A human who showed mercy when we've only known hatred from your kind. It confuses them, makes them uncertain. What if they hurt me?" "They won't." His arms tightened around her slightly, protectively. "You're under my protection now. Anyone who harms you answers to me. And trust me, little human, no one wants that." They entered the forest, and immediately the temperature seemed to rise. Not naturally. It was like the trees themselves were generating warmth, keeping the cold at bay. Snow still covered the ground, but it wasn't the deadly, biting cold of the village. This was gentler, almost welcoming, almost. "How far?" Alara asked, struggling to stay conscious. "Not far. We have a settlement deep in the territory. You'll be safe there." "Will I see Ash in the morning?" She felt Kyle's chest rumble with something like amusement. "He won't leave your side. My son seems to have claimed you as his." "Claimed?" "Wolves bond with those who show them kindness, especially young wolves. You saved his life, cared for him, protected him. In his mind, you're packed now. Which makes you pack in my mind, too." Alara's eyes drifted closed. The warmth of the cloak, the steady rhythm of Kyle's heartbeat, the gentle sway of his walking, it was all too much. She couldn't fight it anymore. "Stay with me," Kyle's voice cut through the fog. "Just a little longer." "Tired," she mumbled. "I know, but you need to stay conscious until we get you to the healers. Can you do that for me?" "Why do you care?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. "You don't know me." Kale was quiet for a moment, his footsteps never faltering. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than before. "I know you knelt in the snow and chose mercy over survival. I know you fed a wounded pup when you were starving. I know you wrapped him in your only blanket when you were freezing. I know enough. That doesn't explain why you care." "No," he agreed. "It doesn't." But he didn't elaborate, and Alara was too tired to push. She let her head rest against his shoulder and focused on breathing, on staying alive, on making it to wherever they were going. The forest grew denser around them. The trees here were massive, ancient things with trunks wider than houses. Their branches formed a canopy overhead that blocked out the sky, but somehow light still filtered through. Soft, silvery light that seemed to come from the trees themselves. "It's beautiful," Alara whispered. "This is the heart of our territory," Kale said, "where the magic is strongest, where we're most ourselves. Magic is real, very real. You're living in it right now. The warmth you feel, the light, the way the forest seems alive, that's ancient magic, the magic of the first wolves." Alara wanted to ask more, wanted to understand this impossible world she'd stumbled into, but her body had reached its limit. Her eyes closed despite her best efforts, and darkness pulled her under. The last thing she felt was Kale's arms holding her steady, and Ash's warm breath against her hand. The last thing she heard was Kale's voice, quiet and fierce. "You're going to live, little human. I promise you that." Alara woke to warmth. Real warmth. Not the phantom heat of dying dreams, but genuine life-giving warmth that seeped into her bones and chased away the cold that had lived in her body for as long as she could remember. She was lying on something soft. Not the dirt floor of her shack. Not frozen ground. An actual bed with actual blankets that smelled of cedar and pine and something wild and clean. Her eyes fluttered open, and she found herself staring at a ceiling made of woven branches and what looked like living vines that glowed with soft, golden light. The room around her was small but beautiful. The walls were a mixture of carved wood and smooth stone, covered with tapestries that depicted wolves running under moonlight, forests stretching into eternity, and symbols she didn't recognize, but that made her chest ache with strange longing. "You're awake." Alara turned her head and saw a woman sitting beside the bed. She was older, maybe 50, with silver hair braided down her back and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled. She wore simple clothes, a wool dress dyed deep green, and had the same otherworldly grace that Kale possessed. "Where am I?" Alara's voice was rough from disuse. "The Pack Settlement. You're in one of our healing rooms." The woman stood and poured water from a clay pitcher into a wooden cup. "I'm Lyra, head healer, and you, brave little human, have given me quite the challenge." She helped Alara sit up and pressed the cup to her lips. The water was cool and sweet, tasting of mountain springs. Alara drank greedily, not realizing how desperately thirsty she'd been until the liquid touched her tongue. "How long was I asleep?" Alara asked when the cup was empty. 2 days. Lyra set the cup aside and began checking Alara's temperature with a practiced hand against her forehead. Your body was shutting down. Hypothermia, starvation, exhaustion. Honestly, I'm amazed you were conscious at all when the Alpha King brought you in. 2 days. Alara looked down at herself and realized she was wearing different clothes. A soft nightgown made of fabric finer than anything she'd ever owned. Her hands were clean, her hair, she touched it tentatively, had been washed and braided. You took care of me, she said, feeling tears prick at her eyes. When was the last time someone had taken care of her? When was the last time human hands had touched her with gentleness instead of violence? Of course I did. Lyra's expression softened. The Alpha King commanded it. And besides, any human brave enough or foolish enough to save our prince deserves our respect. The pack doesn't seem to think so, Alara said quietly, remembering the growls, the hostile eyes. Lyra sighed and sat back down on the chair beside the bed. No, they don't. Humans and wolves have been at war for generations. We've lost many pack members to human hunters. They've lost many villagers to wolf attacks. The hatred runs deep on both sides. Then why am I here? Why didn't Kale just leave me in the village? Because he saw something in you that he hasn't seen in a human before. Lyra leaned forward, her gaze intent. Tell me, child. When you found Ash bleeding in the snow, what did you see? A wolf pup, or just a creature in pain? Alara thought back to that night, to those golden eyes staring up at her with desperate hope. I saw someone who needed help, that's all. I didn't think about what he was, I couldn't leave him there to die. That's why you're here. Lyra smiled, though there was sadness in it. Because you saw past the monster to the soul underneath. Very few people can do that. Fewer still would choose kindness, even when it meant their own death. Before Alara could respond, the door opened and Ash walked in. Still in his wolf form, still massive, but somehow less intimidating in the warm light of the healing room. He padded over to the bed and placed his enormous head on the mattress beside Alara, his golden eyes fixed on her face. Hello, Alara whispered, reaching out tentatively to touch his fur. It was just as soft as she remembered, but now it practically glowed with health and vitality. I'm glad you're safe. Ash made a low, rumbling sound that wasn't quite a growl, more like a purr. He pressed his head more firmly against her hand, and Alara felt a wave of emotion that wasn't her own. Gratitude, relief, affection. It flooded through her like warm honey, and she gasped. He's sharing his feelings with you, Lyra explained. That's rare. Usually wolves only bond that deeply with their own kind, but Ash has claimed you as a pack, as a family. How is that possible? Alara asked, still stroking Ash's fur. I'm human. Blood doesn't determine the pack, Lyra said. Loyalty does. Love does. You proved both when you saved him. As far as Ash is concerned, you're as much his pack as any wolf here. The door opened again, and this time Kyle entered. He looked different in the daylight, less terrifying. He'd changed out of his black cloak and now wore simple leather pants and a loose shirt, but the power radiating from him was unchanged. He was still clearly an alpha, still dangerous, still capable of commanding an entire pack with a single look. But when his eyes landed on Alara, something in his expression softened. You're awake. Good. Thank you, Alara said, her voice small, for saving me, for bringing me here. I know your pack doesn't want me. My pack will learn to accept you, Kyle said firmly. He moved closer to the bed and Ash shifted to make room for his father. You're under my protection. That's not a temporary measure, Alara. Do you understand? You're safe here, for as long as you want to stay. What if I want to leave? Eventually? She had to ask. Had to know if she was a guest or a prisoner. Kyle's jaw tightened. Then you may leave. I won't keep you against your will. But I'd prefer you didn't. The village has already declared you dead, killed by wolves. If you return, They'll either think you're a ghost or accuse you of dark magic. Either way, they'll try to finish what they started. Ilara's blood ran cold. Dead. They think I'm dead. Marcus's father and his hunting party came to your shack the morning after we brought you here, Lyra explained gently. They found it empty except for some blood in the snow from Ash's wounds. They assumed you'd been killed and dragged off by wolves. Did they seem upset? Ilara asked, though she already knew the answer. Lyra's silence was answered enough. They celebrated, Cale said bluntly. Your death was a relief to them. They burned your shack to the ground and declared the problem solved. Ilara closed her eyes, pain lancing through her chest. She'd known the village hated her. She'd lived with that hatred every day. But hearing that they'd celebrated her death, that they'd been happy she was gone, a warm hand covered hers. She opened her eyes to find Cale watching her with an intensity that stole her breath. You have no home to return to, he said quietly. No family, no friends, nothing but ashes and people who wanted you dead. But here, he gestured around the room. Here you have a warm bed, food, safety, people who are grateful you exist, people who hate that I'm human. Ilara countered. Some do, Cale admitted, but others are curious. Others have heard what you did for Ash and want to meet the human brave enough to defy her own people for a wolf pup. You're already becoming a story among the pack, a legend. I don't want to be a legend, Ilara said. I just want to be safe. Do not have to worry about where my next meal is coming from or whether I'll freeze to death in my sleep. Then stay. Kyle's grip on her hand tightened slightly. Stay, and let us give you the life you deserve. The one that was stolen from you. Ilara looked at him, then at Lyra, then at Ash, who was still resting his head on the bed beside her. These were creatures she'd been taught to fear her entire life. Monsters, killers, beasts without mercy. But they'd shown her more kindness in 2 days than her own people had shown her in 20 years. I'll stay, she whispered, at least for now, until I'm strong enough to figure out what comes next. Cale's eyes flashed with something that might have been relief, or satisfaction, or something deeper she didn't have a name for. Good. Then we have much to discuss. Like what? Like what role you'll play in the pack, like how we'll protect you from those who still see you as a threat. Like... He paused, his expression becoming more guarded. Like other things. But those can wait until you're fully healed. He stood, and Ilara felt the absence of his warmth immediately. Rest, eat, regain your strength. Lyra will take care of you, and Ash will stay by your side for as long as you want him. Thank you, Kyle, Ilara said softly. He paused at the door and looked back at her. You don't need to thank me, Ilara. You earned this. Every moment of safety, every piece of kindness. You earned it all when you chose to save my son. Then he was gone, the door closing quietly behind him. Lyra stood and began gathering herbs from jars on a nearby shelf. You should eat something. I'll have food brought up. Soup, probably. Your stomach needs to adjust slowly. Lyra? Ilara asked. What did he mean? About other things we need to discuss? The healer's hands stilled for just a moment. Then she continued her work, not meeting Ilara's eyes. That's not my story to tell, child. But I will say this. The Alpha King hasn't looked at anyone the way he looks at you in a very long time. And for a wolf, that means something. Something powerful. Something dangerous. I don't understand. You will, Lyra said quietly. Soon enough, you will. 3 days later, Ilara was strong enough to leave the healing room. Lyra had protested, insisting she needed at least another week of rest. But Ilara couldn't stay in that room any longer. She needed to see the settlement, needed to understand where she was and what she'd agreed to by staying. Ash accompanied her, of course. The massive silver wolf hadn't left her side except when Cale commanded him to eat or sleep. Even then, he'd returned within hours, curling up beside her bed and watching her with those intelligent golden eyes. The settlement was nothing like Alara had imagined. She'd expected caves, maybe, rough shelters, primitive living. But what she found instead was a village that rivaled anything humans had built. Wooden houses with carved doors and windows that glowed from within, stone pathways that wound between buildings, marked with symbols that pulsed with soft light. Gardens, even in winter, somehow thriving despite the snow, growing herbs and vegetables she didn't recognize. And wolves. Everywhere, some in their animal forms, padding between houses or lying in the sun. Others in their human forms, talking and laughing and living lives that looked startlingly normal. Children, wolf pups, played in a clearing, shifting between forms mid-game, their laughter ringing out like bells. But when they saw Alara, they all stopped. Silence fell over the settlement like a blanket. Every eye turned to her. Every conversation died. "Ignore them," Lyra said softly. She'd insisted on accompanying Alara for this first walk. "They're just curious." But it wasn't just curiosity in those eyes. It was suspicious, fear. In some cases, barely concealed hostility. A woman with dark hair stepped forward, blocking their path. She was beautiful in the way wild things are beautiful. Sharp features, fierce eyes, movements that suggested coiled power ready to strike. "So this is the human," she said, her voice cold. "The one who supposedly saved the prince." "Supposedly?" Lyra's tone turned sharp. "Watch your tongue, Sarah. The Alpha King has claimed her as protected." "The Alpha King isn't always right," Sarah shot back. Her eyes raked over Alara with obvious disdain. "She's weak, fragile. What use is she to the pack? She can't hunt, can't fight, can't even shift. Why is she here?" "Because she has something you lack," a new voice said. Cale emerged from one of the larger buildings, his presence immediately commanding attention. Compassion, courage, the ability to see past her own prejudices. Sarah's jaw clenched, but she bowed her head in submission. "My king." "Alara is under my protection," Kyle continued, his voice carrying across the settlement. "Anyone who harms her, threatens her, or makes her feel unwelcome answers to me personally. Is that understood?" A murmur of acknowledgement rippled through the gathered wolves, but Alara could feel the resentment underneath it. They obeyed because they had to, not because they wanted to. "Come," Kyle said to Alara, extending his hand. "Walk with me." Alara hesitated, aware of all the eyes watching, all the judgment radiating from the pack. But Ash nudged her leg gently, encouragingly, and she found herself reaching out and taking Cale's hand. His palm was warm and rough with calluses. The moment their skin touched, something electric passed between them. A jolt that made Alara gasp, and Cale's eyes flash with that strange golden glow. He led her away from the crowd into a quieter part of the settlement where the houses gave way to forest. Ash followed, maintaining a respectful distance but never letting them out of his sight. "I'm sorry about Sarah," Kyle said once they were alone. "She's been difficult since you arrived." "She's not wrong, though," Alara said quietly. "I am weak. I am useless to the pack. I don't belong here." Kyle stopped walking and turned to face her. "You're wrong." "How?" "I can't do anything your people can do. I can't shift. I can't hunt. I'm just a burden." "You saved my son." Kyle's voice was fierce. "When he was dying, when traitors within my own pack had wounded him and left him for dead, you found him. You fed him. You gave him warmth. You risked your own life to protect him. Do you have any idea how rare that is? How precious?" "I just did what anyone would do." "No." Kyle stepped closer, his golden eyes intense. "That's exactly the point. Nobody would do what you did. Most humans would have killed him. Most would have seen a wolf pup and thought only of revenge for past attacks, past losses. But you saw a wounded creature and chose mercy. That makes you extraordinary." Alara felt heat rise to her cheeks. She wasn't used to praise, wasn't used to being seen as anything other than worthless. "I need to tell you something," Cale continued, his voice dropping lower. Something important. Something that changes everything. What? Alara's heart began to race. Kale reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering against her cheek. Do you know what a mate bond is? Alara shook her head, confused by the sudden change in topic. Wolves mate for life, Kale explained. When we find our true mate, our other half, we form a bond that's unbreakable. It's not just love, it's deeper than that. It's souls recognizing each other, fitting together like pieces that were always meant to connect. That sounds beautiful, Alara said softly. It is, and it's also incredibly rare. Kale's hand moved from her cheek to cup the back of her neck, holding her gaze. Most wolves never find their true mate. They choose partners, build families, and live good lives. But true mates? That happens maybe once in a generation. Why are you telling me this? Kale's eyes began to glow brighter, and Alara felt that electric current between them intensified. Because when I carried you into the settlement, when I held you in my arms and breathed in your scent, I felt something I've never felt before. A pull, a recognition, like every cell in my body was screaming that it had finally found what it had been searching for my entire life. Alara's breath caught in her throat. Kale. You're my mate, Alara. His voice was rough with emotion. My true mate. The bond snapped into place the moment I caught your scent, and it's only grown stronger every day since. Every time I see you, every time I hear your voice, every time I think about you, which is constantly, the bond tightens. But I'm human, Alara whispered, her mind reeling. How can I be your mate? I can't shift. I don't have your magic. I'm not. You're perfect. Kale's other hand came up to frame her face, holding her gently but firmly. The bond doesn't care about species. It cares about souls. And your soul? It's the other half of mine. I know it. I feel it. And I think, deep down, you feel it too. Alara wanted to deny it, wanted to say he was crazy, that this was impossible. But the truth was, she did feel something, had felt it since the moment he'd picked her up in the snow. A connection, a rightness, like every lonely, painful year of her life had been leading to this moment. What does this mean? She asked, her voice trembling. It means I want to claim you as my mate, officially, in front of the pack. It means I want to protect you, provide for you, love you, for the rest of our lives. Kyle's thumb brushed across her cheekbone. But I won't force you. The bond can be rejected. You can say no. You can walk away. I'll still protect you, still give you a home here. But the choice has to be yours. Your pack will never accept it, Alara said. A human as your mate, as their queen, they'll rebel. Let them try. Kale's voice turned deadly. I am Alpha. What I say becomes law, and I say you're mine. The possessiveness in his tone should have scared her, should have made her want to run, but instead, it made her feel safe, wanted, cherished in a way she'd never experienced. I don't know how to be a queen, Alara whispered. You don't have to know right now. You just have to choose. Kyle leaned closer, his forehead resting against hers. Choose me, Alara. Choose this life. Choose a future where you're never cold, never hungry, never afraid, where you're loved and protected and valued, where you matter. Tears streamed down Alara's face. What if I'm not strong enough? What if I fail? You won't. You survived years of cruelty and never lost your kindness. You chose mercy when the world gave you every reason to choose hate. That's the strongest thing I've ever witnessed. Alara closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of Kale's hands, the solid presence of ash nearby, the magic of the forest humming around them. She thought about her old life, the shack that was now ashes, the village that had celebrated her death, the endless cycle of pain and survival. Then she thought about this new life, warmth, safety, purpose, and something that terrified her even more than acceptance, the possibility of being loved. I choose you, she whispered, opening her eyes to meet Kale's glowing gaze. I choose this. I choose us. The smile that broke across Kale's face was radiant. You have no idea how happy that makes me." He pulled her closer, and for a moment, Elara thought he might kiss her, but instead, he simply held her, his arms wrapped around her like he was afraid she might disappear. "The pack won't like this," he murmured against her hair. "I know. Some will challenge you. I know. It's going to be hard, harder than anything you've faced before. I know." Elara pulled back just enough to look up at him. "But I've survived hard before, and this time I won't be alone." Kale's eyes blazed with fierce pride. "No, you'll never be alone again." He took her hand and raised it to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "Tonight, I'll announce it to the pack. Tonight you become my mate, my queen, my everything." "Tonight," Elara agreed, though fear coiled in her stomach. They walked back to the settlement together, hand in hand, with Ash padding proudly beside them. The wolves watched them approach, their expressions ranging from shock to anger to confusion. But Elara held her head high. She'd survived poverty, survived cruelty, survived being left for dead in the snow. She would survive this too. Because she'd given food to a wounded pup one frozen night, and in doing so, she'd changed the course of her entire life. She'd found family, found purpose, found love. And as the sun set over the forest, casting everything in shades of gold and amber, Elara stood beside the Alpha King and felt, for the first time in her life, like she'd finally come home. The pack gathered in the central clearing as darkness fell. Torches blazed. The moon rose full and bright overhead. And Kale's voice rang out, strong and unshakable. "This human saved my son when others would have killed him. She showed mercy when the world taught her cruelty. And tonight, I claim her as my mate. Tonight, she becomes your queen." The howls that rose in response were mixed, some celebratory, some defiant. But through it all, Kale's hand never left Elara's. "You fed my son," he said softly, "just for her. Now the pack will feed you. You protected him when he was weak. Now we protect you with everything we have. You chose kindness, and kindness chose you back." Elara smiled through her tears and squeezed his hand. Her story wasn't over. It was just beginning. If you felt the pull of the pack tonight, then you belong here with us. Subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell. That way, when the next moon rises and I upload a new story, you'll be the first to know. No one gets left behind in the woods. Until next time, remember to listen to the whispers on the wind, stay wild, and see you under the next moon.